It's a special pleasure to be learning with you this evening. It's lovely to see each and every one of you. And what we're going to be doing this evening is trying to get a better sense for ourselves and for the others who are going to be with us during our upcoming Seder, which is going to be coming in just a short week. Just a short week, we're going to be experiencing this all ourselves. So I think that it behooves us to get a sense of awareness of what's going on. And this shir went in a few stages. I at the beginning thought that let's go through a few ideas stage by stage, and we'll get ideas as we go along. It'll be something we can take home, and we will do that. But I was so incredibly taken up by understanding the structure of the Haggadah that I felt that it would be important to understand it for ourselves. And as we go, we'll get the stages along the way. First thing is let's understand what we are doing. Let's get the mission statement before we understand the details. Right? You walk into an office, you want to engage in some sort of business. You want to understand what it's about, what it's supposed to be doing. What is the function of this company? What is the mission of the evening? The reason we sit around the table with our family is because the Torah told us. What are the words the Torah says? V'higarata lebincha bayom hahu lemor. You shall tell your children on that day saying. Now, the word lahagid means, as translated, means what? And you shall tell. Right now, that happens to be, in Hebrew, there are a number of words that could be used for that same word. You could say, va'amarta lebincha bayamahu, v'dibarta im bincha bayamahu. There's many options as to what verb to use in terms of the telling. V'higarat has a particular connotation. And that connotation, in the words of Rav Jonathan Sachs, is that it comes from the root gid. What's a gid? What's the translation of the word gid? Gid is a sinew or a tendon. And a tendon is a very unique property, and that is that it joins the bones and the meat of the body. The point, perhaps, of the Seder is this is not simply telling, this is joining. The point of this experience is not simply to pontificate, to think, to celebrate ideas. It's about joining. It's about connecting. You're connecting one generation and the next. And the next could mean ahead and behind as well. That's the point. You could have 3-4 generations at one Seder. The point is connecting. So let's start with the connections. What I'd like to do with you is the following. Is the Haggadah, for many, is a very long string of words, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. What I'd like to do is try to make sense of it. So just for the sake of perspective, hope everybody can see over there in the corner. For the sake of perspective, for those listening to the recording afterwards, the PowerPoint will be attached to the recording. So we have a certain amount of words. There's the Haggadah is a long amount of words, roughly the size of Pesukah Dezimra. By the first part of the Haggadah, we're managing. Then comes Arami Ovid and the Pesukim, and by that point in time, it's becoming a little more difficult. And then finally, at the end, when we're getting to the end of the 3 mitzvahs, at that point in time, we're all in a very comfortable position, which is somewhere between vertical and horizontal. And the problem is that there's so much to gain from this experience that it's worth trying to understand what exactly is going on with all these different words. So let's start off. The key to this, the key to trying to understand, is really actually in the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah teaches us, if everybody has a source, if you do not, there's extras over here, if anybody needs. Dr. Stein, if anybody needs, there's extras over here. The Mishnah in Source Aleph says the following. This is a Mishnah in Psachim, very clear. But let's try to understand, let's try to associate, delineate the different sections to be able to understand the greater context. Maybe we could just send the sources towards the door just in case anybody needs them, so without having to worry about coming up. The Mishnah tells us the following. Now, let's try to focus on what the structure is over here. The Mishnah tells us the following. Mozguloi kais sheni, after pouring the second cup, so we get this in the instructions, V'kana haben shoel aviv, and here the son asks his father, V'im ein das beben, if the child does not have the sufficient knowledge, aviv melamdoi, then his father teaches him. And now here are the questions, Man ishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylos, and the Gemara and the Mishnah lists all the questions that the child will ask. skipping down 4 lines because we're going to be hearing this in great detail in just a week's time. We're going to go to the second last line of this Mishnah, which is in the middle of the line, starting with the word ulefi. Ulefi dato shel ben aviv melamdoi. And to the knowledge of the son, why the father will teach him. Maschil bignus u'misayim b'shevach. He begins with the more disgraceful elements and concludes with the more beautiful, the enchanting, the salvation aspects of the story. V'doresh me'arami oved avi ad yigmor kol parsha kol. And you take the section of Arami Oved Avi, which is a section in Dvarim, we'll discuss in a moment, and you finish learning that. Darshan is to expound outwards that parsha until the end. And finally, going on to the next Mishnah for just the first line, Rabban Gamliel aya omer, kol sheloi omar, shloisha dvarim elu b'Pesach, loi yotza yadei chavasa. And the person needs to mention 3 things. This should sound familiar. This is part of the Haggadah. The person needs to say 3 things on Pesach, and what are they? And these v'elohen Pesach, matzah, umaro. And then he explains what the significance of each are. So just to delineate right over here, in terms of what the Mishnah is telling us, in the overview at the bottom, I just outlined the fact that you have, what the Mishnah is telling us, you have questions. Then you have the beginning of disgrace and ending with praise. And finally, then we talk about expounding the section of Arami Oved Avi and Rabban Gamliel. So if you look at the Seder, this only explains a certain amount of things. Let's take a look. So first of all, in what we discussed before, Manishtana is understood, right? So the Manishtana, that section is already explained in the Mishnah. The Mishnah actually goes to explain that text. Let's take it one step further. The Mishnah then tells us that we start with the Genus. We start with the disgrace. What disgrace? It happens to be that the disgrace is actually a matter of contention. The Gemara itself in source 2 says, Maschil b'gnus u'misayim b'shevach, my Genus, Rav Omar, mitchila avdei avodas gilulim hayavosenu. Our forefathers were servers of idolatry. Shmuel Omer avodim hayinu. Shmuel says that we were in servitude, and those present the 2 aspects of genus. So what we've covered up till now is the following. We know Manishtana. The Mishnah has told us there is an aspect of disgrace which is found in avodim hayinu. And then we have the Mitchila Avdei Avodah Zarah. So the long paragraph, Mitchila Avdei Avodah Zarah is what we know. More than that, we know that Arami Oved Avi, so we have the whole full section which describes Arami Oved Avi. And finally, Rabban Gamliel and his 3 things. But there's a lot of white spaces in between. First of all, what is even the connection? What is the trajectory of the Mishnah? And moreover, there seems to be a lot of things left out of what the Mishnah is describing, which are actually part of the canon of our Haggadah. As number 1. Let's start methodologically and try to understand this. So, first of all, we're told a very fascinating thing. The Mishnah says that we always need to start by questioning. And in fact, there are many practices in the Haggadah which are about creating questions even. Sometimes even without even creating an answer. Whenever we're stuck, you say it's just because you need to have the kids asking, right? But there are many practices that are throughout the Haggadah to initiate, to try to create questioning. And in fact, the Haggadah starts with questions, Manishtana. But now, the significance of that is very, very important. And that is that although on a nightly basis, here in the shul just a few minutes ago, we all said, we said Zeicher Yetzias Mitzrayim. At the end of Kriyas Shema, we talked about the fact that we remember when we had the tzitzis, or when we talk about the mitzvah, that it was Zeicher Yetzias Mitzrayim. Many things we do in life are Zeicher Yetzias Mitzrayim. We say it in the morning, we say it in the evening. What's special about the night of Pesach? There's something you were doing which is much more significant on the night of Pesach. And the Sefer Yetzias Mitzrayim, one of the aspects of it is the fact that we ask about it. We don't just talk about it, we ask. Asking is so significant because if you're not going to ask, you're never going to change. If you're satiated with the situation you're in and you don't question what's out there, you're never going to get to out there. I have a brother-in-law who learns in Israel, and he related a particular incident when there was a group of people, it was less observant people who had come to Israel to visit, and who happened to be on Shavuos. And they were walking around, and they brought them in at 2 o'clock in the morning to the Beis Medrash, which was a very, very packed Beis Medrash, and it's quite moving when you see at 2, 3 in the morning, hundreds of people, just as if it's the midday, learning and talking and discussing. It's very fascinating to see. They bring in this group who really haven't experienced this type of thing before, and they say, and he said to one of the visitors, "Don't you think it's strange that all these people are involved in archaic texts of 2,000 years ago, debating them as if it was the newspaper report relating to the elections tomorrow, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning?" And the man turned to him and said, "I don't know, it's all right with me." And he said, that was the problem. You see, when you have a problem, when you have a question, when there's something which piques your curiosity, okay, now there's something to discuss. There's something you can talk about. If you're not interested, if you accept, if it's laissez-faire about everything, there's no conversation to be had. And that's something which slaves never have. A slave will never have the ability to question their status quo, to question what is beyond. We start off tonight talking about questioning. Says Rav Rimon, Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, questioning is our freedom, is our ability to move and change from where we are. And that's why it is that the Haggadah itself is so focused, so pivotal around questions itself. It's our ability to get beyond the here and now. But let's take it a little further. That's one aspect. Not only is it questions, the Haggadah then says that we've got this notion of maschil bignus and messiah b'shevach. Right? We have to talk about disgrace, then praise. Now, it's a long night. Right? It's a long night. If we were to cut to the chase, it would be a much shorter night. We'd avoid a lot of the discussions that we're having. Why is that so significant? Why do we need to go all the way back? 2 backs, maybe to our servitude in Egypt, maybe to even earlier our humble beginnings as Avdei Avodah Zarah. Why do we even do that? Perhaps the notion is context. You see, there's a story which I thank Reuven Brand, my previous Rosh Kollel, from pointing out to me in the book by David Pink called "To Sell is Human." And he has a story about a person called Rosser Reeves who is walking through a park and he sees a blind man. When the blind man is sitting there on the park bench, and he has a sign which says the following. Sign says, for those who cannot see it, it says, "I am blind." And people were walking by, and 1 or 2 people were throwing a cent here, a dime there, maybe a quarter even. Rosser Reeves turns to his colleague who's next to him and says, "I wager that I can add 4 words to his sign which will increase 4-fold what he is getting." He says, "Okay." So he takes the sign, he asks the man, and he said, "Do you mind if I take this?" And he says, "Not at all. What can I lose?" And he wrote the following words. I'm going to write them now. He says 3 words, which are 4 words, which are hard to see in my handwriting. And what happened was people started coming by and the money started landing in. $5, $10. And people just kept on giving. And the man turned to one of the people and he said, "Do you mind telling me what's written on my sign?" And he said, "What's written on my sign is the following. It is springtime and I am blind." What he did was, what was Rosser Reeves effectively doing to this man? He's not describing the situation, he was contextualizing the situation. Do you see, humans have an ability to be able to appreciate something only in greater context. What he was doing was shedding a greater context. You see, when you're walking through the park and you're experiencing the beautiful sunshine, the wind breezing gently against your cheek, and the blossoms swaying in the wind, and then you see somebody who says, "It's springtime and I'm blind," you have a greater appreciation of the situation they're in. So the Haggadah says, we're not going to just talk about where we got to. The Haggadah says we're going to describe where we came from. Because when you see it in context, when you see the whole picture, then you get a sense of what it really means. What it really means. 2 fundamental principles the Mishnah shares with us. 1 is questions, number 2 is maschil bignus and messiah b'shevach. Now let's take it a little further. So now, as we pointed out just a little bit beforehand, it's clear that the Haggadah itself is made up. There's a certain structure to it. There is the manishtana. There is beginning with the disgrace, which could mean one of 2 things. And then we talk about Arami Oved Avi, and finally Rabban Gamliel, and 3 things. That's all we're told. But it happens to be much richer, much more beautiful in the fact that I would hope that in just a few minutes' time you'll see that there is an incredible structure over here. There are 3 Haggadahs consecutively following the other, one following the other in the most direct and specific pattern. I'd like to share with you the thoughts of Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, Rav Yatz, phenomenal teacher and organizer in the Holy Land. He's very involved in Job Katif, in fact. And he was here recently, a year ago in Chicago, where the fortune of being able to share in his Torah. And he has a very phenomenal idea about structure. So bear with me for a moment. He has a phenomenal point about structure as a whole. Let's take it the following. If we look at the Haggadah once again, let's start anew. We're told that we need to start off with our context. Two options of what context could mean. It could mean our servitude in Egypt. That's one option. Story number one. Or we could talk about story number two. That in the beginning, mitchila of the avodah zarah hayinu avosenu. That at the beginning we had humble beginnings, and when it talked about Avraham and his parents, we came from humble beginnings on a spiritual level. Fascinating. What's interesting is, let's focus for a moment on the questions which get to that story. What is the question which stimulates Avodim Hayinu, which begins the entire process of Avodim Hayinu? Manishtana, right? That's why Manishtana directly precedes what is going on over here. However, what's fascinating is there are 4 questions that precede Shmuel's Haggadah, but there are another 4 questions which precede Rav's Haggadah. Did you not notice that the questions of the 4 sons directly precede our humble beginnings as of the Avodah Zarah? Isn't that fascinating? 4 questions of Manishtana, and then we have Avodim Hayinu, and then suddenly 4 questions from the 4 sons, and then the second option of what our original humble beginnings were on a spiritual level. But let's take it further. Essentially, what are Rav and Shmuel arguing about when they debate whether it's going to be, if it was our physical servitude in Egypt or our beginnings as idol worshippers? What's essentially at the core of that argument, would you think? Right, it's not just time, there's something else distinguishing between them. What is that?
What do they mean by Gnai?
Gnai, okay, so let's take that further.
It's physical versus spiritual.
Okay, so meaning, when defining disgrace, our original disgrace, are we talking about how we were impoverished physically, or are we talking about our destitute state on a spiritual level, right? If you're talking about destitute, you really want to contextualize it, says Rav, take it all the way back to where we started really, our humble beginnings. Look at Avram's family. That's what the argument is. So now look at the questions. The questions of the Manishtana are all noticing things that are going on right here and now, very physical. What's this? Why are we doing this? Why are we eating that? Why are we leaning this way? What are the questions of the 4 sons that precede Rav's Haggadah, the spiritual underpinnings? Are all about the workings of Ma'avodah Zaslachem, Chukim and Mishpatim. Right, there's much more. The answer is it's much more of a spiritual nature, which precede, we'll call it the second Haggadah of Rav. In fact, interestingly enough, it's historically debated whether there were actually 2 Haggadahs, meaning up to the point that we joined the 2. Was there one version of that Rav had and one version which Shmuel had in Israel and in Babylon, and then they were later fused, or that no, the question was what came first? That's a debate historically, fascinatingly enough. But the point being is that there might be two distinct Haggadahs over here with their own pattern. But let's take it one step further. There's a questions, story, but both of them end in the same way too. You see, one of the other points which distinguishes this night, the night that we're about to engage in, and the rest of the year, there are there's a list of many different things that distinguish our regular mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim and the specific night of the Seder. One of them suggests Rav Soloveitchik, one of them is that because we're living it, as I heard beforehand, because we're living the experience, it generates a spontaneous result. It generates the fact that you think, wow, thank you. When I mention it on a daily basis, it becomes part of my vocabulary. When I talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, okay, that is part of our nature. On this night, when we talk about it in great detail, what are you doing? You're trying to cultivate a sense of appreciation. And of course, that's why at the end of this pattern of 3, there is, in fact, thanksgiving. And notice that they're exactly the same almost. Take a look at this. We have at the end of the questions, Manishtana Avodim Hayinu, just after a section of 2 short stories, which are very fascinating in and of themselves, might be defining the parameters of where and when we do this. We have Baruch HaMakom, Baruch Hu. Blessed is Hashem, blessed is He, Shenosan Torah Lamo Yisrael, Baruch Hu. Notice the exact parallel phrase after the Haggadah of Rav. Baruch Shomer Avtachasol Yisrael Baruch Hu Shakadosh Baruch Hu Chishev Esaketz. We thank Hashem in both trajectories. In Rav's Haggadah, in Shmuel's Haggadah, we start with the questions. We talk about the story, different stories, and we end up saying Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem in these two instances. We'll call it a triad. Question, story, thanks. Question, story, thanks repeated twice. It's almost like the parallel one next to each other. The problem is when you've got a Haggadah with lots of explanation at the bottom in English or Hebrew, you don't get the sense of flow. You get the points. There's a much bigger picture going on over here. Let's take it further. That only explains the beginning, right? Let's take it a little further. Notice that in the whole section of Arami Ovid Ovi, in fact, there really are only 4 psukim. There really are only 4 psukim. Those 4 psukim come from Parshas Kisava at the beginning. Fascinatingly enough, why there, of all places? Very fascinating discussion in and of itself. And we darshan out, we expound from those psukim the greater substance of the Haggadah. We talk about, notice that each pasuk has its own theme. It talks about how we arrived there, pasuk 1. Pasuk 2 is how bad they did to us. Pasuk 3 is we called out to Hashem. And pasuk 4 is Hashem saved us. There are 4 specific themes in that story. But notice again, by the way, that it also starts with a question. This section of the Haggadah also says, go out, go find out what did Lavan do. We have our question, and then we have our story again. Do you see again? It's the same pattern. We have our question and then our story. The story happens to be a very long story. And in discussing how Hashem took us out, we have also the fact of how many plagues at the sea. That's all expounding the end of that pasuk over there. And then, of course, at the end of that, we have Dayenu, which is the closing cap of that section, which is our Thanksgiving. Because if we remember the pattern is question, story, Thanksgiving. We have the same thing over here, just a little extended in the middle. Question, story, Thanksgiving. And then finally, the last part. Rabban Gamliel also says the following. He says there's 3 things you need to say, but how does he start off? He says, Pesach al Shumma. He questions, why is that we need each one of these? He explains why we need each of it. We have a story about the Pesach, about the Matzah, about the Maror. And then at the end we say, Lefichach anachnu chayavim lahados. If you really want to look at this in the bigger picture, let's take this back. We have Haggadah 1a, which is essentially Shmuel's Haggadah, starting with Manishtana, the story, and then finally the Thanksgiving of Baruch HaMakom. We have Haggadah 1b, which is Rav's Haggadah, questions of the 4 sons. Then we talk about our humble beginnings on a spiritual level, and the closing with the Thanksgiving, again, of Ahisha under the Torah, which stood through us all the generations. Then we have Haggadah 2. 2 is very long. It's also got a question and a story and a Thanksgiving, but it ends with Dayenu. That's Haggadah 2. Same pattern. And finally we have Haggadah number 3, which is Rabban Gamliel, with 3 short question stories and Thanksgivings at the end. And the question is, why do we need 3 Haggadahs then? Essentially, they all get into the same point. Each one of these Haggadahs is telling us a question, a story, and a Thanksgiving in the same pattern. So why all of them? Why is it necessary to have this extended description of the same thing through different means? And this is the beauty. This is where the beauty comes in. The Mishnah does tell us a very fascinating line. And this line perhaps is the underlying key component of everything we're doing this night. And that is, in the first source, we read it before, the second last line of the first Mishnah. Ulefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo. According to the knowledge or the capabilities of learning that the child has, that, in tandem with that, is how the parent teaches. By the way, this is before 21st century psychology and research. Differentiated education, right here. Right here. Chazal were masters in education. Our people were built on education, and it is still the symbol and the basis of our people. Understanding education and that it works differently for different people. Rambam and Rashi suggest fascinatingly different approaches as to how that is expressed. Rashi on the Torah says, the Rashi is bothered why it is that the Torah keeps us asking. The Torah presents 4 questions. Where do we get the 4 sons from? The Torah talks about your children asking you 4 times. So Rashi is already bothered and he says, wait a second, why do we have so many questions? Rashi says in source 3, this is the top page 2. We're already told that when you come to the land, your children are going to ask you. Why does the pasuk repeat itself, asking us typically the same question? But he says there's nuances in it. In the first section, the question was framed as, what is this work for you? As we discussed in the Haggadah, the question is in such a way that he excludes himself. That's one understanding of what denotes him as a Rasha. Over here it's talking about the child who doesn't understand. But, says Rashi, our psukim, the Torah is teaching us when it comes to some children who don't know how to ask, what do? You teach them an agarata. You teach them a story. Because to them, that is their portal of access to the information, is a story. That might be their way in. The Rambam, in describing the same differentiated education, says it a little differently. Rambam in source 4 says, Mitzvah l'hodia levanim v'afilu lo shalu. You should teach your children, even if they didn't ask, shenemar v'yigarat lebincha, you shall teach your children, lefi dato shel ben aviv melamdoi. This is now paraphrasing the Mishnah. According to the knowledge of the child, the father will teach. Ketzad, how is this so? Imaya katan o tipesh, amar loy beni, kulanu hayinu avodim kamo shivcha zu kamo eved zeh b'Mitzrayim. Now remember, at the time of the Rambam, we're not post the Civil War right here. The Rambam says that you motion to the child and you say, like the slave standing in the outside room, that's what we were. Meaning, what's the Rambam understanding is, according to the knowledge of the child, is you use visual education. You explain to him in the terms that he understands. And there's somebody right outside the door you can relate to as being a slave. We were like that, says the Rambam. And then he says, V'imaya ben gadol v'chacham. If he was a learned child, modi'ai ma'she'ira loy b'Mitzrayim. You tell him all the details. V'nisim shenasu lana al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. Hakol lefi da'ato shel ben. If he's more learned, then you go into the details. You talk about how many miracles and what's going on. You see, over here, between the Rashi and the Rambam, you already get 3 different types of children. You get the type of child who needs to hear stories, because he's not going to really be initiated through his own curiosity. Then you have a child, the way the Rambam describes it is maybe he doesn't even have, the storytelling is not his thing, he's more of a visual learner. So you talk to him in terms of real right here and now. And then you have the child who's more adept. A child who has the ability, he wants to, he's analytical, he's interested, he's curious. You need to give him a little more, says the Rambam. Isn't it fascinating that maybe that's why the Haggadah, in it, the same structure is repeated 3 times? The first section is about stories. You start off with questions and then a bit of our we're putting things in context. We're giving the springtime, so to speak, and the opposite of the Haggadah at the beginning. We're telling a story. That's child number 1, the child who doesn't necessarily have an access otherwise. The second one is for the more advanced, interestingly enough. It's expounding. You take a pasuk, you think you've got a pasuk over here, let's expound, let's take apart every single verse or phrase within this pasuk. Because some children need that. You can't just give them the story. You need to give them something more. And then says Rabban Gamliel, but remember, you need to say, Pesach zu al shema, matzah zu shana ochlim, and point to it. And how does he access the story? He accesses the story through the 3 things you have on your plate. Is that unbelievable? So you have Haggadah 1, 2, and 3. The same story, the same pattern of question, story, thanksgiving, but expressed through 3 different mediums. Why? Because the Mishnah says, Lefi da'asa ben ha'aviv melamda. It depends on who the child is. And you know what? We're all different children in that respect. In all personality differentiations, awareness, whether it be a Enneagram, whether it be Myers-Briggs, nobody's one fixed character. There's a lot of different differentiation within people, and we all appreciate some aspect of this. But at least we say over here, this is not a hodgepodge of ideas. This is a very calculated, very specific process with which we're working. Now let's get a little bit to the details. That's just in terms of just appreciating the bigger picture. Now let's focus on this. We don't have too much time. I'd like to focus with you on 1 or 2 fascinating details along the way. One detail is the following. You'll notice that there are a lot of 4s in the Megillah, right? Now let's what are the fours that we recognize?
4 questions, 4 sons.
4 questions, 4 sons, 4 cups. There's another 4. What was that? Oh, very good. Going to the end. Fascinating. You see, I thought everybody was asleep by then, right? Okay, yeah. And then but there's actually 4 Lashonos Gula which relate to the 4 cups as well. There's also another 4 as well. This is a much more tougher one to know. What was that? Oh, that's interesting that it kind of comes out over there. I didn't focus on that, but notice beforehand, Arami Ovi is how many psukim? 4 psukim. Now, it happens to be very fascinatingly enough. Our Jonathan Sachs points out that they're all actually 5s. Isn't it fascinating? Let's take them one by one. It happens to be when you read in the Mishnah, in the Manishtana, what the Manishtana was, there's another question which we don't actually mention. The Mishnah says in the following, this is again back in source 1, on the 3rd line in the Mishnah, it says, second word on the 3rd line, on all the other nights, we have any meat which is treated in any way, whether it be cooked, roasted, baked. But tonight, it's only roasted. That question we don't have. We have another question in its place. But we don't have that 5th question. Interesting. Let's go a little further. In terms of the 5 cups, or 4 cups. We have 4 cups corresponding to the 4 Lashonos HaGeula. But there happens to be a 5th Lashon of Geula which is also omitted, which is Vavesi. That Hashem not only just extracted us from Egypt and took us to Him, but He actually brought us into the land of Israel, the culminating step, which is sort of quietly omitted. We don't have full redemption. That cup sits on the side. Notice, of course, that when it comes to Arami Avi, we quote the first 4 psukim, but the one that we leave out, there's a 5th pasuk. Listen to how it goes. This is actually in the 5th and last source on the page. Here's everything. This is the whole Haggadah. This is the whole main cross section of the Haggadah. V'anisa v'amarta yidifnei Hashem Elokecha Arami Avi v'yered Mitzrayim v'yagosh Shamim Seima'at v'yisham l'goy gadol atzum v'rav. That's pasuk 1, pasuk 2, pasuk 3, pasuk 4. And look at the last one. Chavav Tes. V'yivienu v'vesi. That's our v'vesi, right? V'yivienu l'makom hazeh v'yitanon es ha'aretz hazois eretz zavas uchalav dvash. Again, the omitted 5th, the missing 5th. There's the missing 5th in terms of the cups corresponding to the Vavesi, which is omitted. There's the omitted Manishtana, that 5th question, which relates to Korban Pesach, in the stage of a Beis HaMikdash. We miss the 5th of the Psukim over here, which relates to being brought into the land of Israel again. Do you see what's happening over here? We're talking about our resolution from exile. But in a certain sense, there is an omission. The Haggadah is not complete. It's waiting. It's almost there, but it's not quite there. We remind ourselves in this night that we were redeemed, but there's still a lot of work to go. There's that missing 5th. And of course, what's the 5th son? The Lubavitcher Rebbe famously says that there are 4 sons, and however bad they may be at the table, there's still one who's not there. And until that 5th son joins us, we will still be lacking. That's the missing 5th of that 4 as well. All the way through the Haggadah. Incredible. Incredible. Just what's not said is in the Haggadah over there. The 5s and 4s.
What is the 5th?
The son, that's the son. That's the son. Unfortunately today, we don't have to look too far to find that 5th son. Unfortunately today, we don't have to look too far to understand that we may have wonderful Sedarim, but who's not at the Seder? Who's not at the Seder? There are many people today who are not the Seder. Many people don't even know what the Seder is. It used to be that Pesach was one of those holidays which everybody knew about. We're losing it. There are people out there who don't even know what Pesach is. There's not even the cultural overhangs. This is beyond that. This is beyond. He doesn't even know. He's not there. That's the missing 5th over there. And that's why it's not a complete redemption right now. It's not the Vevesi. It's not that Hashem brought us into the land. It's not the 5th cup of redemption yet. It's not the 5th Manishtana. Let's take a little further. There's a beautiful Haggadah which Tali was kind enough to share with me, called Matok HaOr, which points out that when we say Pesach Matzah Mor, by that time most people are really in high gear in terms of getting towards the meal. So it's hard to appreciate what's really going on at that point in time. But you notice that there is a little bit of an idiosyncrasy in that section. If you want to chronologically put that section in order, what would be, let's say we have Pesach Matzah Mor, so what would be the order in terms of what we'd represent first? What should come first? The Maror, because it was better than. What would you think? Pesach, Pesach or matzah, maybe Pesach, right, the korban, and then matzah as we're going out. That sounds beautiful, right? Everything works together. The problem is that Rabban Gamliel says, what order is it? Pesach, matzah, and then maror at the end. Wait a second. If you're telling a story, that's a little bit out of order. It says the Matok Ori quotes the Kotzker Rebbe in a most phenomenal idea. The Gemara in Beitzah says that on every Friday night we come to Shabbos and we say Vayichul Hashem v'aretz, and the last word of that paragraph is Vayi no fash, and God rested. It says, however, because on Shabbos we receive an elevated extra neshama, and at the end of Shabbos we lose that, that word really represents a certain sense of negativity. Vai da'avda nafsha. Woe, we lost a nefesh. Vai nofash, vai nafsh. It went away. Right? There's a certain sense of bitterness that the neshama goes away. Problem is, when do we say vai nofash? Friday night. That's not when the neshama is going away. That's when the neshama is joining us. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, but of course, it's only after a week of work that we get out of that week, that we get the neshama. So do you appreciate what the void of the previous week? There's a story told about a Rav in Afula who was asked to meet a person who is in jail. And the person is in jail because the law is that if a person withholds a get in Israel, they're put in jail. The person was still maintaining this, he was for many years not giving a get. So this Rav Reuben was asked to speak to the person in jail. He comes in, he talks to him, and he says to the prison warden, he says, this person's not going to give a get. He is totally satisfied with where he is. He's become accustomed to his surroundings. He's got a workout room. He's got his schedule. He's happy where he is. I'll tell you what you should do. Release him for 3 months and take him back in. And can't do that. They went higher and higher, went all the way to Knesset. They allowed it. They put him on parole for 3 months and brought him back in. Immediately when he came back in, he gave the get. Because when he realized what real life was about, that's when he understood what prison was. At the end of the week, when you get the Neshama Yisrael, you realize what the week really was. It goes Pesach, Matzah, Maror, because sometimes you only appreciate the bitterness of exile once you get out of it. You have to have the Pesach and the Matzah there first. And then you understand how terrible a life you're leading, because we rationalize, we get used to it. That's the life we live. Only when you get out, then suddenly the Maror kicks in backwards. Let's close one perhaps very, very beautiful thought. I heard this thought in the name of Rav Benjamin Blech, who's an incredible scholar, speaker, and writer. And I was fortunate enough, I just wanted to clarify it with him. And I work in Yeshiva University, and I have the opportunity of seeing him quite often. And I was fortunate to be able to speak to him this afternoon and just confirm this particular thought. So it's right from where it came from. You see, this is the structure of everything we did beforehand. And then we move into, after we finish the 3 Haggadahs, right? Haggadah 1, 2, 1a, 1b, 2, 3. What's the next thing that happens? Straight after, what do we do next? The next thing is the first paragraph of Hallel, right? And what do? We do the entire Hallel, and we're dancing and joyous, and then we eat, right? Not exactly, right? Because what happens is that we start the Hallel, and then we eat, and then we carry on Hallel, and then we do the rest of Nirtzah. Right? It's a very strange proceedings. Usually the protocol is, at least in the morning, is that there's an issur to eat before a person's davened. Meaning a person needs to. It's based on a pasuk that that a person shouldn't eat on the blood, which, so to speak, means to say you shouldn't start eating before you've asked for your life from God, right? To put things in perspective a little bit. So that's the halacha, and so you would expect over here, before we start the our part of things, we should go through the Seder. And even if you're going to say, the Seder is very long, so you can't manage that, but at least, eat at the beginning to get you through, and then do the whole thing together. But the splitting up is very strange, right? And even if you're going to split it up, then you should try to find more of a comfortable spot to do it. The middle of Hallel. Where else in the year do we ever split up Hallel like that? We do half Hallel, we leave out a paragraph here and there. We never split up the Hallel in the middle of it. Very unusual. It's almost like the Hallel needs to include the meal. Says Rav Blech, the most unbelievable thought. You see, on this night, as Rav Talabam spoke about a Shalosh Shuros, this is the night of connection with Hashem. This is the night where we reconnect as individuals and nationally with God. God's name, which the name which we do not pronounce, is a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Right? 4 letters. The omniscient. What does that name really mean? We don't understand the full depths, but we are told that name is composite of 3 words. Haya, Hoiveh, V'yihiyeh. Was, is, and will be, which means to say that God in His full expression pervades time. God expresses Himself in past, present, and future all at once. Time is a constraint we live within, God lives without that constraint. And that's why, of course, the letters match up, right? There's all the letters of Haya, Hoiveh, V'yihiyeh in that name, fascinatingly enough. Past, present, and future. It's interesting to note that the Haggadah itself breaks itself up in that way as well. Everything preceding the meal is about the past. It's about where we were, either as Ovdei Avodah Zarah, on a spiritual plane, or in servitude. How Hashem took us out, all the different makos. It's all about the past. It's about what was. Even the Hallel that we talk about, the first 2 paragraphs are Mashpili liros b'shamayim v'aretz, that God sees the lowly ones and lifts them up, but says to Yisrael mitzrayim, that as we went out of Egypt and Hashem saved us, it's all about the past. And then what happens? We stop and we have the meal. And at the end of the meal we say, we say, God, you know what? The greatest expression of God's being with us right now, right here, is the fact that He feeds us on a daily basis. We stop to eat and we thank Hashem for present. He is giving us food. We're experiencing His presence through the fact that He sustains us right here, right now. We move out of the past into the present. And then we hit the hinge. The hinge is a paragraph which is brought in later from medieval times. We finished the Hallel, the beauty of the Hallel, but there's this paragraph of Shvoich Chamoscha. Pour your wrath on the nations. This very interesting, very uncommon expression of the future vengeance, because after we finish the meal, after we finish the past, after we finish the present, we talk about the future. And it's all about Adir Hu Yivneh Beis Habakorov. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. It's about the future. And therefore the Seder night itself breaks itself out most naturally, with the first 2 paragraphs of the Hallel going earlier on that original experience, our experience now and our experience that we hope to be. If you want to take it to the last step, it would seem that the focus of the night of the Seder is in fact that future. Because if you're to choose when would be the most appropriate time to do the Seder, it should be actually, not at night, but in the morning. After all, when did Israel actually step out of the borders of Egypt? Was in the morning. So the Seder should naturally have been to commemorate the event in the morning. But we don't do that. Why not? We're commemorating the experience in the night. As we know, when Rabbi Penna was here, he described this, that lahagid baboker chastecha. In the morning we talk about Hashem's chesed. It's apparent that God's around. The light's there, it's clear. Emunoscha baleilos. But at night, the time where we have to exercise emunah, where we don't see things clearly, and we hope to wish to will to aspire that things will be better. The Seder is put at night because we're still experiencing the night. We're anticipating for the future. So it has the past in it. It has the haya. It has the hoiveh. But ultimately we end off with the yihiyeh, where we talk about the future geula as well, that we hope for. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Thank you very much.